Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. Today, we're exploring one of the most powerful, yet most overlooked, levers for improving safety performance: communication. My guest is Jonathan Hall, founder of SMARTbrief, who spent over 2 decades helping organizations transform the way they inform and engage their frontline teams. We unpack why safety communication often goes in circles, how to make messages genuinely resonate with those doing the work, and why authenticity matters more than ever in an age of automation and AI. Jonathan also shares fascinating stories from the rail industry, from creative campaigns that got people talking to technology that bridges the gap between the boardroom and the front line. If you've ever struggled to turn policies into practice or engagement into action, this episode will give you a fresh way to think about how trust, tone, and technology come together to make safety communication actually work. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Thanks for joining me today, Jonathan.
Great to see you, Christian. Thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, it's taken us a while to get there, but we've got there in the end. So
definitely, absolutely. I've been looking forward to talking to you. Yeah.
Yes, good stuff. So before we get into sort of technology and trust and all of these fun things we're going to be talking about today, be interested to know, what was it that first kind of drew you into the world of communication and then into the world of safety, which came a bit later?
Right. Interesting question. I kind of fell into it, if I'm absolutely honest. My background is actually in visual things. So I started my life as a professional photographer, strangely enough. And then I worked in that area for about 7 or 8 years. Then I kind of found that I had a bit of a knack for taking a brief and started to edge into sort of design communications. And I then ran, for about 15 years, I actually ran a brand and marketing communications business for part of Page Media Group. And that was sort of communications generally to sort of business to consumer typically, and involved in brand development, that sort of thing. So I sort of veered from visual more to sort of comms and strategy and that side of things. And then about 20 years ago, I found I was spending more time managing people than projects. And I've always much preferred sort of getting involved in hands-on projects and taking a brief and delivering something that really works. And so I then went out effectively on my own as a sort of comms specialist, I guess. And it just happened that most of my clients were in the rail industry. So I wasn't an expert, and I'm actually still not an expert in safety. I have no qualifications in safety. So I always remind my clients that, that I don't give safety advice. But what I can do is I can take and understand the objectives that my clients might have, and ensure that the sort of tone and the level and the authenticity of communication is suitable for particular projects. And of course, over time, I mean, I've been doing this now for 23 years. And of course, I have a very good conversational knowledge now about safety, and I have a good understanding of the challenges of different people with different roles within a safety environment, particularly in the rail industry, I would say. But I do also work in infrastructure and construction as well. So, so a bit of potted history there.
No, perfect. Yeah, I think most people don't sort of set out to work in the world of safety. It seems to be something that, either, as you say, you fall into it, or in my case, I was run over into it by a car, or it grabs you in some way, shape, or form. But obviously, once you're into that world, it's a really exciting and fulfilling world to be in, isn't it?
Isn't it? Absolutely. Yeah. And lots of great people doing some cracking work, and, it's kind of real job stuff, isn't it? And I think, interestingly enough, 25, 30 years ago, thoroughly enjoyed the marketing side, but there was a lot of discussion about colours and shapes and all of this. And I did, when I got to about 40, I kind of thought, I don't know about this. I think I just want to be a bit more feet on the ground stuff that seems to matter. I like dealing with operational people in the operations of a business, delivering real stuff.
No, that definitely makes sense to me. So obviously, if we think around the world, there are billions of people working and hundreds of millions of people getting hurt at work. And you've described this kind of never-ending circle when it comes to communication. Um, can you unpack what that means and why it's hard to break and what that means for safety?
Yeah, I think I mean if we look at, for example, firstly the sort of level of digital transformation that's taken place, we know it's been sort of exponential over the past years. But so systems, and there are, as we know, some fantastic safety systems that people are using on their mobile devices, and all these many great systems. When we come to communications, it's a little bit tricky, because when you're talking about using, say, technology for communications, we can't automate all of this. We can
Mm,
automate near misreporting. We can automate. There's a lot we can automate, but when it comes to actually tone communications, ensuring that we're getting the message across that's suitable for the kind of workforce that we have, and you might say the kind of workforces we have within a business. If we're
yeah,
talking to drivers, we might be having a different approach than talking to station staff.
yeah,
So there isn't a one size fits all. And as you mentioned, we are dealing with what is very often a sort of never-ending circle where
mm,
the same issues are going on. It's always winter, it gets slippery, and in the summer. We get leaves on the line, and people, sort of think, why do the rail industry have problems when they just have a few leaves on the line and all this sort of thing? And of course, it's about compacting leaves
mm,
that then create a slippery environment.
yeah,
So what happens is that we find that a lot of what we're doing might be seasonal communications that come up every year, and the risks are predominantly the same.
yeah,
And these risks go on week in, month in, year in, and we
yeah,
have to continually think about ways of communicating the same thing to the same people in perhaps a slightly different way, and encourage people to have their own conversations. And it's about engagement, and that's, it's a bit of a sort of cliche. We might say, oh, X percentage of people have seen this or that, but have they really engaged with it? Have they spoken to their colleagues about a particular risk? And that's really what we want them to do, actually. I think that's as much as we can hope for them to do, is to have a conversation with a colleague about something that might have nearly happened, and they can avoid it and share that experience with colleagues. And so there are tools, and I'm involved in a tool that we've developed that can really help with that.
yeah. So it's about engagement rather than sort of, I suppose it's almost like marketing or let's say LinkedIn, where you can have you can be putting out content on LinkedIn or any social media platform,
Yes.
and the sort of vanity metrics, I suppose, would be, or how many impressions did we get? But actually, it's not
Yeah.
really about how many people scrolled past it and maybe stopped for a nanosecond. It's how many people actually read it and understood it and engaged and maybe commented on it or something.
Most definitely. And interestingly, when we're talking about feedback, it isn't necessarily about getting good feedback. If,
Mm,
if a few people say, do you know what you just posted or what just told us, we think that's a load of rubbish. Great feedback. Why is it a load of rubbish, and what do we want to learn from that? So it's about that genuine engagement. And I think where we have to be a little bit careful with technology is that we've got to make sure that technology doesn't make things less authentic,
yeah.
because as we know, with friendships and with anything, we know that it takes a long time potentially to build up trust, and credibility, and all these things that we all search for and like to build within our own businesses, for example. Doesn't take a lot to for that to disappear.
Mm,
If all of a sudden we find that the people that are communicating to me actually perhaps have another agenda that isn't quite as genuine as I might say, or maybe they're not actually genuinely as interested as they like to make me think they are. Perhaps
mm,
they're saying things, but they're not actually following that up with their actions. And
yeah.
those kind of things can break trust quite easily and quite quickly. And so we need to be very careful when we're using technology to make sure that the authenticity is probably, I would say, the leading emphasis of a piece of communication. Even if
Mm.
it's a bit boring, but it needs to be genuine. And if people are giving feedback, we need to know we believe what they're saying.
Yeah, yeah. We'll get back onto that sort of
Yeah.
authenticity piece because I think that's really, really important. Something that struck me there was actually getting negative feedback, and I think there's something around being British where, let's say you're, again, to move out of the safety world and into something analogous that people will be able to understand.
Yeah,
If you're at a networking event and someone says, "Oh, what do you do?" and you say, "Oh, I do this, that, and the other thing," and someone says, "Oh, very interesting," that sort of polite response, that's
yes,
almost worthless because they haven't really, perhaps they've understood, but it obviously hasn't captured their attention enough to sort of spark any
absolutely.
curiosity. Whereas
Yeah,
actually somebody that says, "Oh, well, um, oh, you'll never be able to do that," or "You can't do this,"
yeah,
or that'll
yeah,
never work. Actually, you've got their engagement then, even though it's a sort of slightly negative way. You obviously, whatever you've communicated, you've done it in such a way to spark something out of them, and that's much more powerful, isn't it?
absolutely, Christian. Yeah, yeah. And interestingly, I don't know whether you listen to a lot of sort of the outside of your business, listen to a lot of podcasts like The Rest is
Mm.
History, or
Yep, yep,
Rest is Entertainment, or these kind of things, similar in a way to what we're doing now, but on a leisure basis, aren't they? I think people want to get more detailed, more in-depth feedback. When sound bites are all fine, but actually I want to really know about what you think. And of course, this is no doubt what led you to do the podcast that you do, which is this safety conversation across the industry, which is
yeah,
great. And
yeah.
I do a lot of listening to conversations outside of work as well, which
Mm.
there's some great conversations going on about all sorts of things, aren't there?
Yeah,
But yeah, and I gather that
absolutely.
folks as well are much more interested in these 45-minute conversations these days. People thought that when they were doing these podcasts that it was always going to be perhaps people in their middle age who'd be most interested, but young people are showing that they really want to get into detail and they want to
Yeah,
identify who's actually got the real message. Because we hear
yeah,
some
yeah.
we can't believe, don't we?
Yeah, yeah. I think this obviously people's attention spans are a lot shorter than they used to be. I think everybody
Mm,
would agree on that. But yet
mm,
there is this interesting phenomenon where um, as you said, the authenticity of actually having a proper, in-depth, unscripted conversation, I think allows you to sort of shine through. And a lot of people were saying, without getting sort of political, but a lot of people were saying
sure.
that that was one of the reasons that Trump won the last election because he went on a lot of
Right.
these long form podcasts, and
Yes.
he was, and actually that helped him to overcome some of the because there was some question marks about his mental
Right.
acuity, wasn't there? But actually, if
Yes.
you're on a 2 hour podcast and you're lucidly speaking for 2 hours with Joe Rogan, I mean,
Absolutely.
there
Yeah.
can't be anything wrong with you. And then on the flip side,
Yes.
Harris, my
Interesting.
namesake, seemed to be sort of reluctant to go on anything like that. So then there were questions mark raised, and yeah, it's very
Isn't that
interesting.
interesting? That is really interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't thought of it like that, but
Hmm.
yeah, no doubt that's a real, plays a part, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of safety then and
Mm,
communications, one of the big challenges which we briefly spoke about before we hit record is, you're sitting there in the ivory tower of a head of health and safety, and you've done your risk assessments and your policies and procedures and so on and so forth, and you think that everything you've done is fantastic. And it may well be, but it might not be.
yeah.
We won't judge that for
Yeah.
now. But
Yeah.
and then between what you've done here and between and the people doing the work, something magical or mystical doesn't happen, and therefore the things you've kind of asked them to do don't occur, and then an
Yeah.
incident occurs, and I suppose that gap is where getting the comms right can be filled, that gap.
And we often have meetings at early stages with internal comms colleagues, but then once we've got that trust again from the internal comms that we have their interests at heart, we then very much just crack on with operations and safety people to
Yeah.
make sure that what it is that's needed, depending on the priority of the type of message. I mean, for example, when we're talking about safety comms, there's so many different issues that we're needing to deal with, and how do we prioritize something that's safety critical that could be life and death
Mm.
on something that might be a continual hazard that we just
Yeah.
want to remind people on. A continual hazard, for example, sometimes we might try and incorporate some humor and try and make things more engaging and chatty, you might
Hmm.
say. Safety critical might be dealt with in a slightly different way. And so very often we're creating campaigns because they run on and on. We might start a campaign, for example, that starts, if you like, you might say, I wasn't going to say boring, but I was going to say function. You know, where we're wanting to build that trust again. So we're wanting to communicate issues that matter to people, to encourage conversation, all of those things. And then once we've done that for a while, it might be 6 months, we start saying, well, look, let's have a bit more fun with this. We've said all this again and again. Let's now let's have a little character. I mean, for example, in the rail industry, there's an item. You have what's called a diagram where you look at your schedule, your working schedule, where you're going to stop, the stations you're going to shop, and that's called a Sheila. And so, you know, we've created a little cartoon character called a Sheila, and she's a bit of a nag because people always forget to read their Sheilas, so they miss a station or they have a fail to stop and all of that sort of thing. And you can say these things again and again, and it's not, for example, a major incident, but of course, as we know, minor incidents can lead to major incidents. So, and we will let Sheila tell the story and kind of be a bit of a nag and say, "Come on, guys, you know, let's, you know, focus on the stations, focus on me to make sure you're not going to miss that station." And we can say things that we might not put in a more standard piece of communications.
Yes, yeah. That makes sense.
Interesting, actually, just while that comes to mind, Christian, another thing that we find very interesting in sharing conversations. So we do a lot of filming of conversations internally within a business. So we might be talking with somebody who's got, you know, 40 years experience, with somebody who's just joined and who's a super confident driver. He's like really perhaps overconfident because he's passed everything and he's thinking, I've cracked it. I'm a trained driver. We're sorted. And then he will be aware of, there's a term in the rail industry called situational awareness, which effectively is thinking about what's just happened, thinking about where you are now, and thinking about what's about to happen. And that is a process where continually retaining situational awareness. It came from the aviation industry, but it's a standard sort of term in the railway. Interestingly, if you were a driver with many years' experience, you might be able to say in a conversation, well, what is situational awareness? If I lose it, basically you've got your head in the clouds, haven't you? You know, get your head out the clouds, concentrate on what you're doing, and avoid incidents. Now, you can't put that in writing. But you can have a guy who's respected in the business saying things like that and reminding people that we have all these terms and we have these, you know, what you might call, you know, you know, you might say situational awareness is a posh way of saying don't have your head in the clouds. I mean, but you can't put that on posters. You can't put that in writing, but you can about it and you can remind people of what it really means to be situationally aware, you know, and again, it's a never-ending conversation, that situational awareness one.
Yeah. You spoke earlier about that engagement piece. So what sort of benefits have you found in developing those two-way comms rather than just kind of broadcasting information out to staff and frontline teams?
I think that's at the heart of it, actually, that question, because it really has to be, the simple objective is to create safety conversations. What can we do more with our comms than have one of our colleagues have a discussion with another colleague about something that, you know, something that's happened to them that they think they can avoid if they do it this way or that way. You know, what better safety conversation can there be than to instigate that across many colleagues? And as we know, I can't speak for other industries, but I know in the railway people are talking to each other less because they're in mess rooms. I mean, of course, people are, you know, I'm sure lots of great pals everywhere, but they do tend to chat less in a mess room because we're all in front of our phones. And so we want to remind people that actually, you know, let's talk more about the business in the mess room. Let's talk more about experiences that we've had. And so if we can also give feedback So we then give feedback to the business. So with a piece of technology, of course, you can present a podcast like we have here, but we can also have that two-way piece where on a system like SMARTbrief, which we may talk about a bit more in that we've developed, it's a two-way communication tool. So feedback and ratings and all of those sorts of things can be provided. And again, that can be reviewed, and particular pieces of feedback, individuals can give personal comments back. So, for example, a campaign that we've recently done was delivered by 28 different driver managers. Okay, so it's not delivered by senior leadership teams. We're able to channel out communications through user groups and libraries, and all of the words that are used in any email or any alert, you might say, to a piece of content are approved by each of those 28 driver team managers. So again, it's not using AI to come up with things that might be seen through. This is authentic comms, but it's coming from Christian, it's coming from Jono, as, look guys, this is an issue, think we should think about this and talk about this, and the feedback can come right back to them, and they can then liaise with their colleagues about the particular risk that they're talking about, and so you can then get it to an even more local level, so it's not seen. I think perhaps the days are over of finger pointing. I mean, there was a time a few years ago when I was often involved in things where people were saying, look, we don't want to, we want to get rid of this blame culture, and I think a lot of people have got rid of that, but there's still difficulties related to that, aren't there? How you deal with disciplinary issues related to safety and all of these things. So the more we can create two-way and that relationship between the frontline and the managers in the office, or the managers that are working out there with them, the more chance we've got of safety being at the front of their mind. Sense stuff, isn't it, really?
Another blocker to that is one of the really dangerous expressions you hear is, "Oh, it won't happen to me." How have you found success in kind of overcoming that through better communication?
Yeah, isn't that an interesting one? Because we're all kind of preconditioned to that, aren't we? I mean, we all think that if with an illness, for example, we think, oh, I won't get that. Somebody else gets that, don't they? And slips, trips, the areas that you're doing, well, I'm not going to slip. That's somebody else who's sort of not so fast on their feet will be doing that. But of course, that's just our internal protection mechanism. And we need to continually remind people actually that it can happen to us. I could get sick, I could fall over, and I can make a big mistake. And the way we've tended to try and challenge that issue is very simply by talking to people that have had stuff happen to them. And again, the tone has to be very carefully managed here. I mean, I'll give an example where there was actually a module of a campaign that we did related to some train drivers that had really unfortunately lost their jobs through having some incidents, some multiple incidents, and they had to be repurposed to, fortunately they didn't lose their jobs with the company, but they were removed from train driving, and they had to take another. Now, so and they very courageously agreed to talk to us about their experiences. So there were two guys, and we had a conversation like we're having now with the two guys about, really the worst working days of their life, where they've had to, go through this process, disciplinary process, really upsetting stuff, and but they were able to advise other drivers what happened, both from a business point of view, from the incidents that occurred, and also how it affected them personally and their families, and how much the worry that they went through. And they said, wow, if I just had, maybe if I just had followed and just kept my focus, I could have avoided this, and they did a fantastic, and it was probably one of the best pieces we did on that particular campaign. And the feedback that came in was just wonderful. People going, best video so far, honest, truthful to the core. Thank you so much for sharing that. Real genuine stuff. And amazingly, those two guys actually went on to win an internal award in the company for doing that. And none of that was planned. It just happened. They agreed to do it. People really appreciated it. And can we measure how successful it was? We can only measure it by people saying, well, do you know what, that affected me listening to that. So yeah, but I think that's a very valuable one. And again, it's not
Yeah.
clever stuff. It's not clever, is it? It's actually just. It's not even creative. It's just functional, authentic communications.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, often that's the way to do it, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so you mentioned slips, trips, and falls. Obviously, that's my kind of area.
Yes.
Have you got any examples or thoughts around kind of work you've done in that particular area? How can we raise awareness? How can we achieve better outcomes in a topic that is uh, what word did you use earlier when you didn't want to use the word boring? Functional.
Functional, perhaps. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that's my struggle constantly, right? It's kind of like everyone understands that it's a problem,
Absolutely. Yeah.
but it's not often top of their list. And if it's not top of the list for
Definitely.
the safety manager or the safety director, then it's definitely not going to be top of the list for the frontline member of staff.
Absolutely, and I think this is where the creative aspect really does come into play. Because I think, and I'd be interested to hear your views on it. But I think
Hmm.
that when dealing with subjects like slip, trips, and falls, we all know what they are, and we know that they're well in the industry. We know they're a massive risk, and we
Yeah.
also know that most of the people we're talking to often aren't too worried about that. It is a continual challenge getting them to prioritize that issue. And so creative approach to those campaigns, I think, is always a priority. Whether we're using humor, whether we're using little cartoon characters. For example, we did a campaign around the Olympics with First Rail, and we coordinated. Actually, it was specifically related to get finish your journey safely, and in that instance we were using lots of sporting analogy, for
Yeah.
example, and we coordinated that activity right across the whole of First Group. So they had, at the time, they had six operating companies, so it
Yeah.
became a national campaign. And interestingly, to create conversation on that, we had things like the safety teams were doing tours around the stations, with little pop-ups, and they were going through a Q&A. It was almost, without being cynical, it was almost disguised as a Q&A. It was like a
Yeah.
survey, but actually it was the function of the survey was not so much to hear people's views, it was actually to inform them. So,
Right.
so the questionnaire on the survey might be, did you know where the lifts for disabled people are on the station? So they're actually on the station, and they're asking people, did they know? Do they know this? And do they know that? And of course, if they say no, they say, do you know? Well, they're over there. So they're getting that information on what percentage of people had a knowledge, but they're also informing them at the time, and they're doing it personally as well. So it's
Hmm.
always about people talking to people and finding excuses to have a conversation. I know that, of course, it's limited, isn't it? How many people you can talk to on a station.
Of course.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but you're making some noise on there. You've got posters on the walls, you've got personal conversations. Um, Internally, of course, you've got the ability to utilize other tools like video and for the internal comms. But of course, for passengers side of comms, that's more of a challenge unless you're
Yeah.
integrating with the wider communication picture that the business has. But yeah, so we're continually looking at new ideas on that, never ending. Needs to, because as soon as we've done something that whether it's however successful it is, we can't do that again for another few years. The wheel has to
Of course.
turn, and we have to
Yeah.
keep on coming up with stuff.
Yeah.
In the same way that a creative agency does. That's where I think the creative aspect really comes into play.
Yeah. That makes sense. I think, yeah, finding as many different ways as possible of saying the
Yeah,
same thing is
absolutely.
because you don't want to be sort of bombarding with too many messages, because then people, it won't sink in. You want the same message, but sort of
Yes,
figure out a different way and a different angle
absolutely.
of
Yeah,
saying it, don't we? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes.
Um, so going back to authenticity, I mean, one of the things that I am really excited about is AI.
Of
But
course.
but I also have some concerns about it as well. And one of my big concerns is around a potential loss of authenticity, because if
Yeah.
AI is creating all of this content and books and whatever, posters and
Yeah.
videos and where does it end? But
Yeah.
that isn't authentic, is it? Because it's not being created by a real
No.
person. What's your view on that?
Um, I think that in relation to communications, I think we do need to be really, really careful, because you don't want me to have a pre-recorded message on this podcast, do you? And I don't want,
No.
as a train driver, I don't want a pre-recorded message from my driver manager, or that something that feels or senses as pre-recorded coming through. So it's all about people drive in the railway. We say it's all about drivers talking to drivers, or people talking to people. So I think that, really interestingly, I mean, of course, AI will play a massive part, and as we know, there are many fantastic systems for things like near miss reporting, and lots of safety systems that will
Yeah.
utilize AI, and will be fantastic. But in relation to engagement, I think that we need to always stop and think about the value that it's going to bring. It may enable us to do more, because with AI, as we know, we can save a lot of time. So we can
Yeah.
create briefings quicker, we can create content quicker, but doesn't necessarily mean we want to overload people with content? Do we want to give them more? Because they might just go, oh my God, I'm getting so much from these guys, I'm starting to look like wallpaper.
Yeah.
So where I think AI will have great value, and actually has done for some time, is that, for example, on our system, we're built around Microsoft Azure platform, which of course
Right.
is a phenomenally sophisticated piece of technology that has many different modules, and we can look at different things that they do and say, oh, okay, they've started to do that. Should we build that into our system? For example, we can look at feedback, and an AI tool can actually look at how genuine it thinks that feedback is. Is that feedback authentic, or are they just saying that? And
Yeah.
don't ask me how it does it. I don't know. But anyway, there are tools that can do that. There are tools where we can search within videos, and I think that's very interesting when we come to something like route learning, for example. Let's say we've got films of the route that we want drivers to be able to learn. Now,
Yeah.
rather than just search for a route, we can actually search within routes. So we can search for a signal on a route. And then we could send an alert out from our system to the driver saying, it's just been a near miss at signal 414. Can you just search that in your SMARTbrief app? Just go and remind yourselves of the risks associated with that signal. So they haven't got to go and scroll around and look around, and they can go straight to that point in a video. And that sort of
Yeah.
is actually quite simple use of
Hmm.
technology. It's not hugely clever, but it's functionally very useful. And we can also create kind of how to, in a way. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Christian, but this issue of the brain drain, people leaving businesses and
Hmm.
losing knowledge about the safety in the business and the operations of the business. People that have been working 40 years, they retire, they're gone, aren't they?
Yeah.
And or they leave and they're gone. And we can go some way towards creating search functionality that utilizes AI, that enables them to find content,
Hmm.
how-to guides. How do I do this? And we see, for example, with SmartBrief in the future, that you'll be able to ask it anything about your business, and there'll be different ways that it can inform you about that subject that you're talking about. How do I
Yeah.
fix this coupling between these two trains on so and so piece of kit? And there's somebody there, right there, to tell you about it. And there's
Yeah.
also the policy paperwork that might align with it, you can also link to. So these aren't hugely clever uses of AI, but they are very useful in saving people time.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I've answered that clearly,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's just being very careful with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always think it's an enabler, or a multiplier is probably the word to use. So, any technology, but particularly AI, will multiply your results and your efforts. So, if you're doing a good job now in whatever field, and you get enable AI to enable you further, then you can multiply the
Yes.
beneficial effect. And if you're doing something badly and you
Yeah.
plug it into AI, then it's going to multiply that bad sort of effect, isn't it? So I think
Yes. Absolutely.
um, it's about maintaining that in this context that we're speaking, that authenticity and that human touch, and then thinking, well, how
Yes,
can we use the AI to sort of, personalize or deep dive or or multiply or whatever,
absolutely,
but not lose that, but sort of, enable, get the AI to enable
definitely,
that positive stuff
definitely.
to go further.
And more tools will enable us to do that, I think, with comms all the time. So yeah, 100%. I think something I find quite interesting when we talk about AI as well is that everything, we know that there's this huge transformation that's taking place. And, when we listen to podcasts about it, it's quite mind blowing at times, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you hear these gurus that are talking about what's about to occur and the level of job functions that are going to be removed and phenomenal stuff. Um, but something I sort of reflect on sometimes when I hear that is that I understand what they're saying, but I also reflect back when I was 20. And there wasn't any mobile phones,
Yeah.
and but my day was pretty similar to how it is today.
Yeah.
I got up, I had breakfast, I went to work, I stopped for lunch, I carried on with work, and I went home and hopefully did something interesting.
Yeah.
Now, how different is that? So we talk about the world being so different, but is it really so different? I know that these functions change, but of course our priorities are always the same, our
Hmm.
challenges are always the same, and I'm not sure that the impact will be as quick as some people suggest, because I think people still have their own challenges and they'll be just utilized. I mean, I think the opportunity, for example, for young people is just absolutely phenomenal,
Yeah.
because it's going to be the people. My understanding of AI is it's about understanding how to direct it as
Yeah.
opposed to do it. Because our
Hmm.
AI is going to be about the direction that you take,
Yeah.
and the AI can do it for you, but you've got to know how to manage it.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, I saw something where it was sort of saying, if you think about a project, the AI can do the bit in the middle, but you need to kind of come up with the concept, and then you need to
Absolutely.
sort of sign it off and figure it and finish it off at the end. But the AI can do most of the things in the middle, but you've got to be able to
Yeah.
tell it how to best serve you in those areas. Yeah.
Absolutely, which creates incredible opportunity, doesn't it? And yeah,
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. It absolutely does. So yeah, it's definitely one to keep monitoring and keep on top of, which
yes,
I'm sure
yes,
everybody will be doing.
yeah.
Um, so talk to us in a bit more detail about what your business does, and you alluded to it a bit, but kind of talk to us a bit more about in more precise terms
Okay,
what sort of things you do.
thanks, Christian. So we have an app and broadcast system called Smartbrief, which we developed about 5 years ago, with partly from a grant from TFL grant and in association with one of our clients, where we were dealing with exactly the challenges that we've been talking about today, where we were producing some really good briefing videos, and in fact, we were producing some really interesting. Just we were working with ex soap stars, for example,
Oh yeah,
creating. I mean, for example, we work with Sean Williamson, who you know from Extras,
yeah,
and thing, and obviously in Extras he was out of a job, wasn't he? And so we made him Roy, and he became a train driver, and so he made a number of films with us, and he wrote them. He's a super clever guy. He wrote them, and we created some really fun comedies actually, and they weren't belly laughs, but they were genuinely amusing.
yeah,
We had some really good stuff. We produced about 3 or 4 different 20-minute productions about things, and they were getting lost on the intranet.
right,
So what was happening was that they were budgeting. These were quite big budget productions, and they were getting lost, and people go, oh, I can't find it. It's on the internet somewhere, and so this, and so we said, well, look, perhaps we need a kind of private broadcast system where we can start to channel out content to frontline teams and make sure they always get the priority of content that we want them to see, but they can
yeah,
always access everything related to it very easily. So we developed SmartBrief, and as I explained on my background, I created a joint venture with a company called Objective Computing, who are a Microsoft Gold partner. So it wasn't me playing around with technology. This is a robust Microsoft-based tool that's being developed. About
yeah,
5 years ago, we started, and we have since created a sort of a joint venture business together on this, and And so it was all about then starting to focus in communications to the particular small or large groups within the business. So we have a user group for, it might be a particular region or might be a particular job function. Then we have content in libraries. And what happens when those individuals go to their SmartBrief app, they will always see and only see the latest, most important piece of information for their job that matters to them. They will not see anything that doesn't relate to their job. That's all hidden away for somewhere else and for somebody else to see. And they can search within that functionality for any other content, of course. But, it's always going to, so they know that if they open their app, very simple interface, always will be a simple interface. They'll see the latest piece of information that their colleagues want them to see, and then behind that they'll see other information in a date priority. There are lots of different settings where you can have high priority that stops anyone being able to see content. If there's something really urgent happens, say what happened at Avanti yesterday with the derailment, for example, there might be a brief in that instance that would go out on an urgent thing, and people couldn't watch other content until they'd acknowledged the receipt of that content. So, and then there's things like Q&As that can associate with it. We can build in deadlines, so there's automatic reminders. Lots of functionality has been developed over the years. And a number, interestingly, while we developed it for video, about half the clients use it for document management. And in fact, very interestingly, when the first client came up with an internal document called Safety Critical Document Management System, we were like, whoa, hang on, this isn't a safety critical tool, to talk to them about our insurances and all those sorts of things. But what was fascinating is that's how they saw it, is that for them, they saw it as a safe place where people on the move could receive information. And in fact, we're just about to sign up one of the UK's biggest rail operators that have 4,000 frontline staff. And they're just about to take the system on specifically for their core, what's called ones and pons, which are weekly operating instructions. So that then becomes not only a briefing tool, but it's actually a key part of that person's working day, because the Sheilas I spoke to you about, they'll be on SmartBrief. So now, they're on there as well as, and people can access them from there as well.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, it sounds like a great journey and a very valuable tool. And we're probably crossing over in lots of places that we didn't know about. So we'll have a separate conversation about that, I'm sure, at some point. If people wanted to learn a bit more, would LinkedIn be the best place to kind of connect and ask some questions?
Honest, I haven't been quite as proactive on LinkedIn as I should be. I mean, we are quite a small business, and no excuses. I just haven't been as proactive on LinkedIn as I should be. But we're about to launch some new modules on LinkedIn. They can find me, Jonathan Hall, on LinkedIn, and so we are about to promote some new modules. We've got an induction system we're about to launch, and as I say, the document management system we're refining as well as we move forward. So contacting me via LinkedIn, Jonathan Hall at SmartBrief would be great.
We'll put the link in the notes as well, so that people can find you there. So, last question then from me, Jonathan. If you could give one piece of advice to somebody who's joined us today, who's a safety risk management leader, who wants to connect in a better, more authentic way with their frontline teams, what would that advice be?
A one-liner, gosh. I suppose I would say keep it simple, keep it authentic. But also something else I just have to say is try and learn to do some of it yourself. I mean, for example, something I hadn't mentioned is that we help people produce their own content. It's not all about raising purchase orders to produce high-end content.
Yeah.
Learn to produce content on your smartphones. Learn to do briefings to your phone that you can share with colleagues. Create conversations. It doesn't need to be top-end equipment. And so, something, any listeners might like to contact me, I'll be very happy to, at no cost, provide them with information on how they can produce their own content, and use the tools that's in the phone that's in their pocket to produce some really decent content. 15 quid microphone, a little tripod to put it on, and you get started. And you can practice it yourself. It's cheap as chips, and it's about making it easy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if you're doing it yourself, then that's where that authenticity will shine through. So,
exactly. Yeah,
definitely agree with that. Good stuff. All right. Well, thanks so much, Jonathan.
Lovely.
Yeah, great conversation. Really, really important topic. Communication is so important in everything that we're doing. So yeah, appreciate your time.
Oh, it's lovely talking to you, Christian. All the best.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.